I invite all the MPs to join us. You can all gather in. Okay. Bonjour, bienvenue. My name is Erwin Kotler. I miss this place, having been here for 16 years, but I'm delighted to be here in the company of families of political prisoners from human rights violator countries who are all up for re-election to the UN Human Rights Council. So what we will do today is, number one, we will hear respectively from each of these representatives of political prisoners from these violator countries. We'll then hear a statement from Helen Neuer on behalf of the NGO community, and then we'll have the MPs concluding, and then we'll take questions. So I'm delighted to begin with Ensaf Hader. She is the wife of imprisoned Saudi blogger Raif Badawi. She will be accompanied by Evelyn Abidbol, who will act as her traductrice, as her translator.
مرحبا للجميع. جميعكم يعلم عن قضية زوجي رائف بدوي. ما الذي يمكنني أن أضيفه لم يقل من قبل؟ لا شيء. أستطيع فقط أطرح أسئلة لأننا لا نحصل دائما على أي أجوبة.
Bonjour à tous, je vous remercie de nous recevoir ici. Vous connaissez tous l'histoire de Raif Badawi. Que puis-je ajouter qui n'a pas été mentionné jusqu'à maintenant? Je peux seulement poser des questions, étant donné que nous ne recevons pas de réponse à toutes les questions.
نعلم جميعا أن كل الجمعية الوطنية لكيبك ومجلس العموم الفرعي وهذه اللجنة المهتمة بحقوق الإنسان الدولية قدمت التماسات وطالبت السعودية بالإفراج عن زوجي وجمع شمله مع أسرتي في كندا. هل توصلتم بردود وما هي متابعاتكم لهذا الملف؟
Les questions, je les adresse au gouvernement canadien. Nous savons tous que l'Assemblée nationale du Québec et la Chambre des communes ont adopté à l'unanimité des motions demandant à l'Arabie saoudite de libérer mon mari et de lui permettre de retrouver sa famille au Canada. Quelles sont les suites données à cet appel à Ottawa?
نعلم جميعا أن حكومة كيبك من خلال وزيرة الهجرة السيدة كاثلين فيل والتي هي مناصرة عظيمة لرائف بدوي وأسرتنا منحت رائف الحق في تسريع إجراءات الهجرة وأيضا منحه المواطنة الشرفية بمدينة شربروك. أتساءل أيها السادة الكرام، ما الذي حصل منذ ذلك الوقت وما هي الخطوات الموالية؟
Nous savons tous que le gouvernement du Québec a accordé à Raif un certificat de sélection, la première étape pour accélérer son processus d'immigration. La ville de Sherbrooke au Québec l'a nommé citoyen d'honneur de la ville. Qu'est-il arrivé depuis? Quelle est la prochaine étape?
هل ستمنح الحكومة الكندية لرائف بدوي ممر آمن لكندا؟ نعلم جميعا أن هناك أمثلة مشابهة كما حصل مع مدافعي حقوق الإنسان برواندا. وفي موضوع آخر، حينما وقعت كندا اتفاقية السلاح مع السعودية وأقوم باقتباس ما كتبته صحيفة مونتريال جازيت، هل تستطيع كندا دعم حقوق الإنسان بالخارج بينما هي تدعم الأسلحة في الداخل؟ صفقة بيع 15 بليون من المعدات الحربية، الصفقة الأكبر في تاريخ كندا.
Le gouvernement canadien va-t-il accorder à Raif un sauf-conduit pour qu'il sorte en toute sécurité de l'Arabie saoudite? Nous savons tous qu'il y a des précédents canadiens dans ce sens. À titre d'exemple, pour la défenseur des droits humains du Rwanda en 1994 et par la suite également. Que me reste-t-il à faire pour que le gouvernement canadien intervienne pour faire venir Raif ici?
هل ستستمر الحكومة الكندية في مساعدتنا حينما تستقبلون لاجئا بالبلد؟ هل تأخذون بعين الاعتبار الطرف الآخر من العائلة الذي ما يزال تحت التهديد والخطر؟
Ok. Une autre question, lorsque le Canada a signé le contrat d'armement avec l'Arabie Saoudite, et pour citer le titre d'un article de la Gazette de Montréal publié en 2016, le Canada peut-il soutenir les droits humains à l'étranger tout en favorisant les fabricants d'armes dans son pays? Est-ce que le gouvernement canadien aidera notre famille lorsque le pays soutient une famille de réfugiés? Prend-il en considération l'autre partie de la famille dont la vie est menacée ailleurs?
من سجن دحمان بالسعودية إلى بيت عائلتي بشربروك كيبك، جميعنا نتقاسم أمنية وحيدة أن يتم جمع شملنا قريبا. أملنا فيكم كبير. ألف شكر لكم.
De la prison centrale d'Arman en Arabie Saoudite, où est emprisonné Raif, lui, notre famille vivant à Sherbrooke au Québec, nos amis et nos sympathisants avons un unique souhait, que nous soyons à nouveau réunis, et notre espoir est en vous et au gouvernement canadien. Merci.
Merci. As I mentioned, we have 4 witnesses representing each of the human rights violator countries that are up for re-election to the UN Human Rights Council this month. And one of them is Saudi Arabia, and we've just heard from Ensaf Hadar. We'll now hear from a second violator country, and that is Russia, and we'll now hear from Marcus Kolga, a human rights advocate, journalist, very much engaged in the Russian situation. Marcus.
Thank you, Erwin. In February 2012, Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov spoke right here in this spot at a press conference organized by Erwin Collar. He warned us about the dire state of freedom, democracy, and human rights in his country. In the years since Vladimir Putin took office, countless political activists, whistleblowers, and rights activists have been detained, murdered, or have died under mysterious circumstances, and the total today is unknown. During that same time frame, 39 journalists have been killed in Russia, countless others have been detained, and free media in Russia has been forced into silence. Civil society has been targeted with crypto-Soviet laws that allow the government to shut them down if they're deemed to be quote-unquote foreign agents. Just today, or overnight, Memorial, a organization in Russia that's focused on looking into Soviet-era human rights violations, was deemed to be a foreign agent and is being shut down. LGBT activism in Russia has also been criminalized. Just last week, an independent Dutch-based investigative team confirmed that a missile belonging to the Russian armed forces was shot down a civilian liner, MH17, in 2014, killing all 298 civilians on board. And today we see the unspeakable horrors unfolding in Aleppo as Russian jets bomb UN aid convoys and civilian targets, including hospitals. Mr. Putin's barbarism, it seems, knows no bounds, and he acts with complete impunity. A Russia led by Boris Nemtsov would have indeed looked and acted much differently. And that's just what Vladimir Putin and his murderous team of kleptocrats are afraid of. When he was here in 2012, Boris Nemtsov begged the Canadian government to adopt Magnitsky legislation that targets human rights violators with sanctions. Magnitsky legislation, a pro-Russian law, he pleaded, would help protect Russian human rights activists. Sadly, some in this country say that Magnitsky legislation will stall the government's proposed re-engagement with the Putin regime. Apparently, some things do have a price. Sadly, Boris Nemtsov was shot dead by assassins 3 years after his visit to Ottawa, and politically motivated violence continues to grow in Russia. Shortly after Nemtsov's murder, his colleague, activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's also stood in this exact place twice, asking for the Canadian government to adopt Magnitsky legislation, was poisoned within a hair of his life. The Helsinki Accords, linking respect for human rights within states and lasting security among states, could not be more relevant than they are today. We can help today's activists by keeping the memory of all the Nemtsovs, the Litvinenkos, the Magnitskys, the Politkovskayas alive. And we must hold the Putin regime accountable by rejecting its participation on the UN Human Rights Council and shutting off their access to the free world by adopting global Magnitsky legislation in all states that respect human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcus, and that for a compelling reminder of Boris Nemtsov's message right here in the Charles Lynch Room 4 years ago. It's my pleasure now to call on Rosa Maria Paya. She heads up the Latin American Network for Young People, has testified before the U.S. Congress, Senate, parliaments around the world. Her father was assassinated in 2012. Prior to that, he had received the Sakharov Prize, and she will speak now representing another human rights violator country, Cuba.
Thank you so much. I came from the longest dictatorship in the Americas, a dictatorship that, like, in an act of mass manipulation and of course murder, has remained like disappeared during almost the last 6 decades. I came from a country where having an opinion is not considered a human right. A country where having an opinion has been penalized with prison, isolation, and attacks from the authorities. And at the moment in which your opinion becomes a proposal for democratic changes, your life could be at risk, as it happened to my father and to my dear friend Harold Cepero, 32 years old, 4 years ago, when they died in an attack executed by agents of the Cuban state security. Many political prisoners are still in jail, and many other Cubans are subjects of arbitrary detentions. Those that protest in the streets are beaten, and the lives of many dissidents are endangered today. Because of the dictatorship, a whole population has been forced into poverty and live without the most basic human rights. About 20% of Cubans live in exile, and thousands have died trying to escape the island. Several of them could be dying today and have been dying during the last several months because they have been stuck in Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, trying to escape the dictatorship in Cuba. The regime's intelligence apparatus and the powerful propaganda machine have contributed to the erosion of democracy in the region, especially in countries like Venezuela. And that's the government responsible, and that government, the one that is responsible for all these atrocities, is now applying for a re-election to the Human Rights Council, to continue his work with impunity, to continue the repression of the voices of the true, and to continue suppressing those who advocate for liberty and justice. I have suffered in first hand the repression of the Cuban government in Geneva. I was silenced by the Cuban ambassador in the center of the Human Rights Council. The mission of Cuba in the Human Rights Council is to behave as the heckler veto, vetoing all the voices of freedom, vetoing all the expressions that are trying to get democratic changes in the rest of the countries, and especially in the countries that we are representing. That's why I appreciate a lot the work of all the MPs and the NGOs that are here today, and that are working in opposition to the re-election of Cuba for the Human Rights Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosa. And our fourth human rights violator country, China, will have as a witness testimony today from Yang Jianli, himself a former political prisoner in China who's emerged as the world's leading advocate for human rights in China. He is accompanied here today by Tiana Wang, a third-year law student at McGill, whose father, Wang Bizhang, is and has been imprisoned and tortured in China for the last 14 years. Tiana Wang spoke upstairs before, and so they're dividing their witness testimony between them. And we'll now hear from Yang Jianli.
Here.
Oh, here. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. On March 14, 2014, Cao Shunli, a Chinese human rights activist, died in a Chinese military hospital, with her body showing signs of severe mistreatment during the 5.5-month detention. She was arrested at airport while trying to leave China to Geneva for a training session. That June, she had organized a sit-in outside China's foreign ministry, demanding that citizens be allowed to participate in preparing China's human rights report to the United Nations. Today, I speak in her spirit. As a citizen of China, try to voice the concerns of the people of China, the concerns that must be heard by the United Nations, by virtue of the fact that the people of China are misrepresented by their unelected government in the world body. In recent years, many democracies have been afraid of angering China, so they have made little or no effort to push on human rights bilaterally with China. But the UN mechanism provide opportunities for them to come together to confront China on its human rights record collectively with a lawful right and without risking being accused of interfering with internal affairs. Such an opportunity will come up in 3 weeks when the UN General Assembly will vote to choose new members on its Human Rights Council. Some people have repeatedly hoped, or maybe pretended to hope, that the inclusion of China would behave it. But the abysmal record, China's record, has proved just the opposite. The death of Chao Shunli, I just mentioned, took place just 4 months after the General Assembly granted China's re-election bid to the Council in November 2013. And during its current 3-year term, thousands of instances of abuses took place in China. Just to name a few, a peaceful Uyghur scholar, Ilham Tohti, was sentenced to life. The Tibetan spiritual leader Tenzin Deli Rinpoche died of torture in prison in 2015. The number of the Tibetan self-immolation cases has climbed to 145 from 122. And the Xi Jinping regime waged attack on China's civil society on a scale and ferocity unseen in 2 decades. With more than 320 lawyers and activists arrested, disappeared, harassed. And its offensive against the civil society only got further intensified a little more than a month ago when China passed a new law to impose security controls on foreign NGOs. To any sensible people, voting to put China on the Human Rights Council would be like picking the fox to guard the hen's house while he was still wiping feathers off his mouth from his last meal. A candidate needs 97 votes to get elected at the General Assembly. If every democracy says no, chances for China will be 0. So this vote would be another moral test for all democracies. So I urge Canada, the great democracy, not to humiliate the great country and its people by failing this test, and to lead collective action among democracies and openly vote a no vote on China. Thank you.
We'll now hear on behalf of the NGO community, Helen Lawyer, Executive Director of UN Watch, and then we'll turn it over for statements by the parliamentarians.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for hosting us, and also all the members of Parliament who are here as well. I'm standing here with Javier, who is from the Human Rights Foundation, together with my organization, UN Watch. My name is Hillel Neuer. I'm the director of UN Watch. We have put out the report that all of you should have. If not, you can find one on the side. And I just want to say a word about the report. First, I'm humbled by the moral force in this room. We're here with leading dissidents who have either suffered in political prison or their family members have been killed because of their democracy advocacy, or their family members are currently in prison. Being here in Canada, I grew up in Montreal. I think Canada has a special moment now. Canada has announced that it's back at the United Nations, that it's running for the Security Council. Canada has a special voice and can take the lead. And what we're asking for in this report is for all democracies, including Canada, and here we launch our global campaign to oppose non-democracies running for re-election. And we call on Canada to uphold the founding principles of the United Nations and of the Human Rights Council, which requires members to be elected that have a solid record on human rights. And some may ask, why does it matter if China, Russia, Cuba, Saudi Arabia, and others get elected? And you see there are other countries mentioned in the report, including Iraq, Malaysia, Egypt, that are also that we reject in this report. Well, it matters when countries sit on the Human Rights Council. Saudi Arabia is sitting on the Human Rights Council, and they managed to defeat any attempt at holding them accountable for the carpet bombing of Yemen or for what they're doing to Raif Badawi, Ensaf's husband, now in prison. The Saudi ambassador here in Canada, when he was questioned by Embassy Magazine, he said, we have a great human rights record. We are members of the UN Human Rights Council. So they use membership as a false badge of legitimacy. When China was a member of the Human Rights Council, which they are, when we brought Tiana Wang to speak in Geneva at the UN Human Rights Council, they sent spies dressed up as NGO activists to spy on her. There were articles in the New York Times and here in Canadian media about how they tried to spy on her. As Rosa said, when she spoke about human rights in Cuba, Cuba, as a member, was able to silence her, to appoint experts who praise Cuba at the Human Rights Council, and to intimidate groups from speaking out. Russia, too, uses its membership to give itself immunity from its actions both within Russia and in Ukraine, Crimea, and Syria. So what we're asking for in this report is for all democracies to speak out. The last time we had elections, China and Russia won 176 out of 193 votes, which means every country in the world other than 17 countries voted for them. And we're asking Canada and other democracies to make sure that things this time are different for all the countries that are represented here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hillel and Javi, for that eloquent statement on behalf of the NGO community. We'll now turn it over to our MPs. This is, from my own experience, one of the largest MP all-party representation at any press conference that I've seen. And we've asked for one person from each of the parties to speak briefly to you. From the Liberals, we have Michael Levitt, who will be speaking on the behalf of the Liberal Party. He is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and chairs the Human Rights Foreign Affairs Subcommittee. And he's accompanied here by Anthony Housefather and Judy Scrow. And I know that Mark Miller and Arif Irani were on their way, may have already been here, but I'll call on Michael Levitt to begin.
Thank you to the Human Rights Foundation, UN Watch, and the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for putting on this important event. I want to welcome the families of the political prisoners and all of civil society that is here, shining a light on the hypocrisy that exists at the UN Human Rights Council. When we look at some of the members, Burundi, Ethiopia, Qatar, Venezuela, and we look at the four countries highlighted here today, China, Russia, Cuba, and Saudi Arabia, thank you, we can understand why there is such concerns being raised. The election criteria state explicitly that these countries must have a good record in human rights. That is not the case. And what we see with the UN Human Rights Council is a body that seeks to spend a disproportionate amount of time focused on one country, focused on Israel, a democracy. That cannot be allowed to continue. There must be a voice for democracy, a voice for human rights heard on the Council moving forward. I also want to take this opportunity just to mention the incredible work being done by all members of Parliament. Human rights transcends partisan political lines. Human rights are a value that we share as Canadians. And being up here, and you're going to hear from members of the NDP and members of the Conservative Party, esteemed members, but I have come to understand in my almost year in Parliament, that human rights knows no partisan lines. It's very, very important that we continue to call out these acts, these countries for their acts. And I want to take the last 30 seconds just to speak about a human rights catastrophe that is taking place in the world as we speak. Aleppo. We cannot turn our backs. We cannot look away from what Russia is doing in Aleppo as we speak right now. The bombing of civilian targets, barrel bombs, hospitals being destroyed, women and children, families being absolutely, it's a catastrophic state. And we must call for the UN to undertake an investigation into these actions because I have to tell you, war crimes are being committed on the front lines, and we need to have a strong voice in making sure that Russia and Syria are called out for these actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. It is indeed a mockery of human rights in a country that is engaged daily in war crimes and crimes against humanity in terms of Russia in Aleppo, let alone other situations, could possibly even be a candidate for the Human Rights Council. I'll now ask one of the members of the Conservative Party, it'll be Peter Kent, the Foreign Affairs critic. He's here with James Bizan to speak on behalf of the party.
Thank you, Erman. It's a real honor to stand today with these four witnesses representing serious, outrageous, rights-abusing countries. We in the official opposition urge the Canadian government to engage more aggressively with these four countries specifically, but with others on these rights issues. And we will, in the Foreign Affairs Committee in the weeks ahead, be urging the government to fulfill the unanimous will of Parliament a year ago to pass the Magnitsky Act in its fullness as we study the Special Economic Measures Act and the Corruption of Foreign Officials Act. The official opposition also encourages, and we will push the government to aggressively and publicly speak out in the days and weeks before the election process for the misnamed Human Rights Committee against the re-election of these significant human rights abusers. And we also, along that line, in the longer term, as the government re-engages, as it says, with the United Nations, to work for the reform of this world body, to regain the principles and the focus on freedom, democracy, and the rule of law that was embodied in the United Nations Charter when it was formed so many years ago, and from where it has slipped so seriously in the decades since.
Thank you, Peter. We'll now hear we have two people here also from the New Democratic Party in the person of Murray Rankin and Hélène Laverdière. And Murray Rankin will be speaking here on behalf of the NDP. I just want to say that all the people who are speaking today and those who are accompanying them from their party are all co-chair of the newly established Raoul Wallenberg All-Party Parliamentary Caucus for Human Rights. It's the first time we've had an all-party human rights caucus in Parliament. As it has been said, human rights crosses party lines. It's part of the overriding pursuit of justice, and I'm delighted to have Murray now speak on behalf of the NDP.
Thank you. As usual, Erwin said it all. I'm very proud to be part of the Raoul Wallenberg All-Party Parliamentary Caucus on Human Rights. With my colleague Hélène Laverdière, we and the NDP want to associate ourselves entirely with what has been said today and in the campaign that Human Rights Foundation and the UN Watch have proposed. We think it is appalling that Canada would even consider voting in favor of human rights abusers to be on that committee for all of the reasons so eloquently presented by Hillel just a moment ago. We have the 4 human rights violators that have been discussed today. I guess I would just like to talk about Raif Badawi for just a moment in the eloquent words of his wife Ensaf Haidar. He has been flogged 50 times in January. He's now spent 1,595 days plus in a Sadai prison. He has 950 lashes and nearly a decade in prison left to serve. Yet that country, which has done that to him for merely speaking out about human rights, is a country that we would want to have on the Human Rights Council. Just to say it is to point out the absurdity. With my colleague Hélène Laverdière, the NDP is also anxious to shine a light on Canada's human rights record insofar as it's selling arms to that part of the world. And I think that's what we've called for a committee, a parliamentary committee to review that as well. I understand from something that Hillel said earlier that I'd like to repeat just by way of conclusion about the possibility of that country, Saudi Arabia, being on the Human Rights Council. He wrote this a while ago. "It is scandalous that the UN chose a country that has beheaded more people this year than ISIS to be head of a key human rights panel. Petrodollars and politics have trumped human rights. It seems to me self-evident that we cannot allow that to continue." Thank you.
Thank you, Murray, and I want to thank all the parliamentarians for their eloquent and compelling statements. We'll open now for questions. Yeah. All right.
Thank you all for your statements today. I just wanted to get a sense from you how much of a change of direction this would be if Canada was to vote against these 4 countries that are brought up today. What have those votes looked like in the past? Maybe Mr. Kotler, you have knowledge of that, or if anybody does, could you maybe speak to that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The votes are anonymous.
Former students, so it's much better coming from a student.
Thank you, Professor. The votes are anonymous. We do not know how countries vote. And so we can only guess. As I said, for China and Russia, we know that only 17 countries didn't vote for Russia and China last time. We don't know who the votes are. We did see there was a dump of cables, of Saudi cables, and we saw that Saudi Arabia proposed a deal to the British government. And based on interviews that were made with British officials, it seems that Britain has conceded that they did vote for Saudi Arabia last time, which is outrageous that the mother of constitutionalism would vote for a country that is one of the worst human rights abusers, if not the worst human rights abuser on the planet. So we don't know how Canada voted. And I think one thing that we can expect from the Canadian government is to announce, if they won't say specifically on these countries, to at least declare that they will vote according to the criteria of elections, which require that they consider the human rights record of that country. That sufficiently would say a lot. And if they would go on the record and say that they won't vote for the countries that are listed here, that would be an accomplishment. But we don't know how they voted in the past because those are they're not public.
Just as a follow-up, how could Canada use its campaign for the Security Council seat, which is really important for this government? How could this vote coming up at the end of the month weigh into that? Could this be used to boost Canada's reputation at the UN?
Well, votes at the United Nations on any number of issues are traded privately. Support for a Canadian seat on the Security Council in 3 years, 4 years, there would be requests for support by other countries for that vote, for Canada to support them on memberships for committees, for support for motions before the United Nations, and very often these are, as the United Nations has evolved from a majority of democracies to a much broader range, from barely 50 countries to more than 190 countries today. I think governments over the years have compromised themselves behind the secrecy of those traded votes. And I think it would be helpful and it would be encouraging for the government of Canada to state publicly how it will vote, even though that would probably earn them a negative vote in their campaign for the Security Council years from today.
If I may comment on that briefly, thank you. Sorry. Yes, well, I think in fact what has always made given Canada its strength, its full respect for rule of law and full respect and support for basic UN principles. And I still think it's our greatest strength. We moved away from support, for example, for UN principles under the previous government. So if we go back to that, I think that's what can help Canada the most. Thank you.
And let me just add one thing to these comments. I want to disagree with MP Kent a little bit. I don't believe it's a black mark for Canada to be standing at the UN, working with like-minded allies that are democracies and do believe in human rights, to be working to fix the elements of the UN that have gone slightly off the rails and are not upholding their mandate. I think Canada showing leadership at the United Nations is a very good reason that we should be part of the Security Council.
Monsieur Housefather, c'est parce que Monsieur Housefather est un député du gouvernement. Est-ce que vous avez fait ce message-là à Monsieur Trudeau, à Monsieur Dion aux Affaires étrangères, que le Canada devrait voter contre ces pays-là et le dire publiquement?
Je vais laisser la parole à M. Levitt, qui est vraiment le porte-parole sur cette question. She wants to know if we passed the message to the Prime Minister on this.
J'ai besoin de français.
Je crois que généralement, nous avons des discussions dans le caucus qui sont privées. Bon, j'aimerais pas aborder qu'est-ce qu'on a décidé et discuter dans un caucus, mais c'est sûr et certain que les députés sont francs dans le caucus. Et si vous avez des députés ici qui disent des choses publiquement, ils sont probablement dits privément aussi.
Any other questions?
Une question pour vous, M. Cutler, à propos du traité d'extradition en Chine qui est discuté actuellement entre le Canada et la Chine. Je veux savoir, vous, c'est quoi votre vision là-dessus? Est-ce que c'est cohérent que le Canada discute d'un traité d'extradition avec la Chine actuellement? Étant donné...
Je préfère... Non, je préfère s'il y a un député, peut-être Michael Levy ou quelqu'un qui siège sur le comité qui peut répondre parce que...
Oui, écoute, quand même, je pourrais commenter.
Comment ça?
En tout cas, je vais y aller. Moi, évidemment, je pense que ce n'est pas cohérent d'avoir un traité d'extradition avec la Chine. C'est une grande préoccupation. On sait que le système de justice est très faible, en fait que les cours et les tribunaux sont souvent utilisés pour commettre des abus des droits de la personne. En plus, effectivement, de la question de la peine de mort, mais je pense que le problème est beaucoup plus large que ça. Et je suis très inquiète à l'idée que le Canada négocie un traité d'extradition avec la Chine.
Vous ne voulez pas vous prononcer parce que vous ne voulez pas vous mouiller? Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord ou pas avec qu'on discute d'un traité d'extradition?
J'ai invité tous les députés ici aujourd'hui, alors je vais lui donner la parole. S'il y a quelque chose à la fin, je peux lui dire.
If I could just speak to your question, and that is, we've been very clear that why negotiate? Why, or as the minister has split hairs on whether discussion defines negotiation. Why open talks on extradition treaties with China, which the premier only recently said would be in chaos if they didn't maintain the death penalty. We know that due process doesn't exist. We know that extrajudicial imprisonment, torture, organ removal, and murder occurs. So our position is basically, why begin talks at all unless Canada is either playing China for other reasons or there were strings attached to Mr. Garrett's release?
Just on that last point, our foreign policy toolkit involves many different aspects. It involves diplomacy, it involves the military, it involves trade, and you can be sure that when our government is sitting down having discussions, all these things are coming up as part of it, and our human rights beliefs and values are absolutely part of any sort of discussions we would be having with any countries on these issues, and we're seeing that in the way we're engaging around the world. That is not a negative, it's a positive.
So will you stand up at the United Nations, your government, you're the one representing liberals here today, will you stand up at the UN and say, like a number of people have asked here, will you say that you're going to vote along with the UN expectations that that human rights abusers shouldn't be on the council?
So I'm not here representing the government. I'm here as a member of parliament. I'm a liberal member of parliament, and I will certainly be relaying and having this discussion with Minister Dion and the individuals that are going to be involved in that. But I think that the human rights records of those that are seeking a seat on the Human Rights Council have to absolutely be considered.
Yeah. Can I follow up on your question? Last time when China tried to get elected 3 years ago, we waged a global campaign opposing China's membership. We could collect more than 1 million signatures around the world and 12,000 from China. But still, China got 176 votes from the UN General Assembly, and only 17 did not vote for China. And U.S. admit that they didn't. They told us they didn't vote. I don't think Canada did. And I think U.S. and Canada were among the 17. But my question is not whether the Canada will vote China again. I urge China to take a leadership to bring the democracies together, to come up with a collective action to confront China. Number one. Number two, and when I vigorously lobby the diplomat in New York opposing China's membership 3 years ago, I got to talk to a diplomat from a very big democracy. He admitted to me they had to trade votes with China. So I don't want that happen with Canada. One way to do it, I made a suggestion a few days ago in Washington at a Freedom House event to have an open ballot to elect members for Human Rights Council. The ballot only helps dictators to treat both under table with democracies, and the democracies will not risk being scrutinized by their own people back home. So we want to give a lever to the people back home, Canada, for example, to watch what their government do in UN. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
I'll tell you, I know we're governed also with that question period is about to begin. I've got to respect the members of parliament who are here. Thank them for being here. As in particular, thank our witnesses, because they suffer the ongoing pain and torment of their loved ones being imprisoned and tortured in prison, and the ongoing pain of seeing human rights violators of those prisoners elected to the UN Human Rights Council. So I want to thank them all for being with us, MPs, NGOs, witnesses alike. Thank you all for your questions and for your attention, and we're delighted to have these things, we hope, on a regular basis in an all-party configuration so that we can come together in the pursuit of human rights in common cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's stay the activist here. I guess we'll talk to the journalists. Let them talk to the journalists. Yeah, yep.